Hi, Meg. Welcome to the Debrief. It's going to be so fun. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I love having these kinds of conversations. So really appreciate the invite.
Awesome. Well, as a brief intro, this is the Debrief presented by Bright Hire. The Debrief is a series of conversations with founders, executives, and talent thought leaders about hiring and building high-performing teams. I'm your host, Teddy Chestnut, Bright Hire co-founder, and today I am truly thrilled to be joined by our guest, Meg Bear. Meg is the president and chief product officer at SAP SuccessFactors. Meg, again, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to talk about your career, your approach to hiring, your reflections on DEI, the future of HR, how AI is changing the game. But first, let's do a little warm up and get to know you. Sound good?
Sounds great. What do you want to know? Tell me.
I want to know what your first job was.
All right. Well, my very first jobs were, of course, a large variety of minimum wage jobs. So I will leave that aside and talk about my first real job. So I was recruited right out of college into an ERP technology company. And of course, I had no idea what any of that meant. But it was wonderful because it was both a immersive experience and it was a startup experience, and the combination of the two, sort of a big problem set, a very concrete technology goal, and then a startup where there was a lot of fluidity. I was hired initially in sales, and then instantly recruited into the tech support, and then on through to an engineering group.
Very cool. All right, we'll come back to early career stuff. If you weren't in this job right now, what would be your dream job?
Well, my dream jobs are really all about having an outsized impact with my unique set of skills. And so really that looks like a lot of things, but it looks like taking the intersection of change and of technology and using that and applying that towards real problems not only that are acute, but that are kind of urgent and that people are willing to pay money for. So that you could put that in a lot of different places and find some value to that, I think.
Very cool. What's the last recommendation that you gave to somebody else? Like somebody asked you, I need a good X. What do they ask for, and what
Right.
did you say?
Yeah, so I get asked advice a lot because I do a lot of kind of individual coaching and support. And honestly, my answers are almost always the same thing, but tailored to this particular conversation.
Yeah.
So the advice I always give is understand who you are, understand your uniqueness and your strengths, figure out how to signal that and shout that to the world. And then most importantly, find a way to use that to help others. And once you get that formula right, then it's a lather, rinse, repeat. And I believe you can't go wrong. So again, how I get there with each person is kind of tailored to their thing, but that's really the same thing everywhere. And I think that's what we all need to do more of.
Very cool. What are you reading or listening to right now?
Oh my goodness. So I just started, and I did post this on LinkedIn. I just started the book Invisible Women. This is a book about data. It's less than just a gender diversity topic. This is a book that really grounds you in understanding the future, it's all sort of AI and data driven. And this book is blowing my mind, and I'm only on chapter 3. So really, everyone should read this book, not women, anyone who's in technology, anyone who's interested in policy, anyone who wants to think about how we shape the future. It's mind blowing.
Invisible Women. All right, we'll have to check it out.
Invisible Women.
Last one before we go deeper. What is your favorite interview question and why?
So, my favorite interview question is really some form of what do you want to learn and why? I like to be asked that. I like to ask that. I think when you understand what motivates learning in people, you understand what their growth path will look like, you understand how to put them in a place of power, and you understand how to create greatness, not just in the conversation, but also what to do with it after.
Do you view that question as an evaluative question? Like there's a good answer or not as good answer that you're looking for, or is you asking that in a different part of the interview where I already want to hire this person and now I want to figure out where to put them?
I think it informs everything I think about the person. Are they right for this particular role? Is there a better role that they would be right for? Are they, how are they going to contribute if they get the role? And then so there is a strong evaluative nature of it for me. But it also, I think, informs how the person thinks and what they're motivated by, and sort of how they deconstruct what they think they understand from the job and what they know about themselves and how they want to contribute. So it really just gives you that breadth of understanding and creates an interesting conversation. So it takes you all kinds of places. And frankly, when you're doing an interview, either as a candidate or as an interviewer, it's important to like build a rapport and have a conversation. And the more you can understand about the person and what makes them tick, that works better for me to think about the broadness of that opportunity.
I love that. Okay, now we're gonna dive in a little bit, go all the way back. So you were,
All right.
if my reading was right, first in your family to go to college.
Yes.
Today you're president of SAP SuccessFactors. So that is a remarkable run, and a lot of I'm sure a lot of like zigzags along the way.
Sure.
Looking back, like what were the formative experiences that laid the foundation for that trajectory?
Yeah. So, again, I think if I really reflect, it's a lot about learning and it's a lot about mindset. So I did have a really good gift in being first in my family. There was no expectations or even, understanding of what success looked like. So I had a really open slate, blank sheet of paper for discovery and for change and for taking shots, giving it a try, not holding myself back either because of expectations of others or because of fear that I didn't know how to do something, because I didn't know how to do anything. And what the heck, might as well give it a try. So I really do think in the end that was a huge gift, and it really did form. But the other bit is I'm just so curious, and that curiosity and that willingness to just say, hey, I really want to try things. I really want to learn things. I really want to see where, this can take me. And the combination of that plus, luck and opportunity and people investing in me really just created a path of greatness. Of course, not without some setbacks, but generally, I'm just so fortunate that combination really was worked out. And tech is such a great place for that, because let's be honest, things change so fast that if you are willing to just jump in and learn and, get to know what it is you can contribute, there's probably a place for you.
Are there, again, looking back, certain things that you got curious about that, again, on reflection, you're like, wow, thank goodness I took the time to get really curious, and maybe that wasn't part of my remit, but I was going to go explore this?
Yeah. So here's where I think the gift of my background being economics versus just computer science really helped. Because one of the things that I started doing very early, and I didn't even know I was doing it, was to start connecting what I was learning and what was needed for my job with what I thought the market would need. And so it was something I sort of intuitively did, where I adapted my focus and the things that the opportunities I pushed myself towards based on where I thought the largest addressable market was, either within my company or within the market writ large. And so I kind of instinctively invested my time in learning things that I could see were going to be needed in the future, were going to be growth areas in the future, and that were going to have, again, outsized impact in the future. I'm not sure that most people do that. I think that's just this weird quirk I have of being super curious and also curious across a blend of topics. But I do think that helped me a lot in navigating my career, because I focused on not just what were interesting trends, but what did I think the trends were telling me as far as, addressable market, customers, business opportunity, growth opportunity, et cetera. And again, you and I, we live in a time where that there's a lot happening, and there's a lot of things that you can use to help you understand that, which has also really helped.
Very cool. When you think about the shape of your career, Like straight line, up to the right, zigzag, like swirly? Like how would you draw the line that follows the path of your
Yeah, mostly got fortunate and got straight line up to the right up until probably like my early executive career. So early on, I was really fortunate that I was a super hard worker. I was super focused. I got really good opportunities, and I just put my head down and did all the work. And that I think really pays off in the early stages of your career.
Mhm.
And then you get to a higher level, you get to larger organizations, you start to get the hint that maybe just technical delivery or sort of great leadership of your own team is necessary but not sufficient condition for career elevation. And certainly once you get to a senior executive, it becomes much more complex.
Mm.
And so at that point, I did have a few opportunities where I had to like take a step back and evaluate, what got me here might not get me there, and what are the skills that I'm missing that are needed in these next big jumps. And sometimes those came, after reflection and a little bit of redirection. And sometimes I had to like step back and really get some help from mentors, from
Mm.
guides, et cetera, to kind of figure out, because at the end of the day, those are blind spots, right? So you have to get somebody to help you see what you can't see. And so, yeah, a little bit of both, but generally I've been super fortunate. And then I think the other bit is because I'm always interested in where there is growth and where there is learning, I naturally kind of push myself out of my comfort zone pretty easily. And that I think helps as well.
Very cool. I'm curious. You've hit like so many different industries and functions, and you've landed in the world of kind of people and HR and human experience. Did something draw you toward that? Was it happenstance? Like, do you have a natural proclivity for that? Like, how did you end up in the world of HR and kind of HR tech?
Yeah, again, like everything else, sometimes it's a little bit of both. But I'll tell you, this is my second round actually in HR tech. I spent about a little more than a decade, and then I took a little bit of a detour, spending some time in other industries to try to see what I could learn and kind of expand my own thought horizon. And now I'm back again into the people space. And I will tell you that there's a couple things to really love about the people space. I'm sort of naturally drawn to what creates uniqueness in humans and how technology impacts humanity. It's just something that I'm naturally drawn to. So there's a lot of joy in it for me to be able to do both for my day job, to be honest. But I also think that at the end of the day, it's technology with people that really is the big growth driver and the big risk in the future. And so again, back to the wanting to have an outsized impact. And for me, an outsized impact is not just a commercial impact; it's also a human impact. And I see we are at such a pivotal point of what the world is. What work means, quite frankly,
Yeah.
and how that creates both opportunity and risk in the global economy, not just the developed world, but the developing world. And I feel like how could you not want to be part of navigating that and hopefully making it better?
Very cool. It's a good segue. I want to talk a little bit about your approach to hiring and building teams specifically. And one of the things you've talked about is um, like being dedicated to unlocking human potential. And I'm curious how that relates to your approach to hiring generally. We can go more specifically, but at a high level, right? How do you connect those two?
So, two things. I do believe that in this world where there is so much changing, and in tech where you cannot just stand still on your skills and expect that to pay off for you, I think really understanding potential is the key and is the most important thing. And so when I think about building teams, so forget hiring. Hiring is an action towards building
Mhm.
teams. But it's not the only action. Some of it is developing. Some of it is, evolving and adapting existing workforce, et cetera. And so when I think about building and developing teams, I think, again, because I'm sort of not mentally constrained by my own career of having to have a singular path or even having to fit into a singular mold of what a box of a particular role might be. I'm not mentally constrained either with my own team of how the organization needs to be. And so I really believe that anytime you're hiring for roles, of course there's work that needs to be done, but also it's useful to get to know what are the strengths and what are the capabilities of an individual, and then overlay that against what you need to get done. And so this is where potential really matters, right? It's not exactly do they have this particular skill. It's do they have the componentry to develop that particular skill, and will they in the end get more done by their learning journey than somebody that already has it. And the reason that's important is sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes you need somebody that already knows. Yep. But if you don't have that creativity of thought, what is going to really be a barrier is doing anything that's new that doesn't have a lot of people that have done it before. And if you don't have that way of thinking, you're going to constantly, and more importantly, over time, it's going to get worse. You're going to constantly be of a mindset that you're on a treadmill that you can never recover from, as opposed to, that having the opportunity to find what it is in people that can get them to that level of capability. And so again, this isn't exclusively about hiring. This is about building teams. Yeah. And hiring is a critical piece of this, but it's also part of how do you bring that into the whole to build an organization that is adaptable and that is, reaching their true potential, and can also develop over time so that you're not in trouble next year for that new thing that comes your way, that new challenge, that new thing. So really building the psychological safety, the confidence to learn, all of that as well, it becomes really important.
I would love to plumb this a little bit with you because I think you hear it consistently, especially across senior executives, that hiring for the next 2 to 3 years is incredibly important. You talked a little bit about actually how you define potential or spot it. Like, does somebody have the fundamental building blocks to be able to put the pieces together? What are the other things, if you were to break down potential as you're searching for it, whether that's in an interview or whether that's in the course of working with somebody or developing a development plan or succession plan, what are you actually looking for? Like, what are the atomic elements of potential?
Yeah. And so again, I think it can show up in a lot of different ways. And this is kind of tied to our conversation before we came on camera about is the only way to be successful is to be a morning person and to be a type A or to be an extrovert or all of these things, right? I do think that it can come, the key is it can come in lots of packages. But if you don't know how to unlock those packages and you don't know how to assemble those packages together in a productive way, you're going to be in trouble. And then, maybe it is smartest to fall back on, I only need extroverts that are early birds and that are type A personalities and, all of that. So first and foremost, I think a little bit of creativity on the organization itself in recognizing that potential might look different than you, which is super important when we get to the diversity conversation. And that potential that you need might be different than what you've seen in the past. And so again, that gets to, sort of creativity in yourself to really challenge yourself on how much are you kind of stuck in your own ways of thinking about potential. But your core question is, how do I do it? And so I like to think in terms of a few things. I already gave you one hint. I like to understand learning agility, right? How interested are you in disrupting yourself? And what does that look like for you? And that's really where the kind of what do you want to learn question comes from, is recognizing, is there humility in that? Is there, is there curiosity in that? Is there, a particular way that you break that problem down? And I think that for me, that actually helps me learn as well, right? Because again, if you only see potential looking like you and how you would break down a problem, then you're constraining yourself. So I'm actually, as part of that, trying to learn and challenge myself of like, hey, maybe there's other approaches that are really important. So learning agility is important. Thinking about how you take risks and thinking about how you even understand your own risk taking is important. I think in the broader context of psychological safety is important. And this is where I think, understanding someone's willingness to be vulnerable, understanding someone's willingness to be wrong, understanding someone's willingness to, to fail in the service of learning and what they would think about with that. And then understanding, the individual's overall curiosity and how they could maybe be a thought partner, a challenge partner, for the organization writ large. And so to me, these are all pieces of potential that I value deeply and that I think most of us have, but aren't encouraged to use as much as we can. We're often not encouraged to be challenge partners. We're not encouraged to be thought partners at the broader sense. Or if we are, we're given a very narrow corridor for it. And so I like to think about, how much of that potential discussion is really the responsibility of the organization to kind of bring forward. And so that is kind of conceptually how I break it down. What is my responsibility to build culturally within the organization? What is the individual's gifts that they're bringing? And do I see a match that isn't just good for the problem today, but might help me learn and adapt and do better in the future?
I feel like you sketched out a great interview plan for like testing for learning agility and creativity and potential, which is kind of cool. I also loved your take on, people use the phrase like unlock potential, which gives you the mental image of like, I have a key, I unlock it, I hire this person, and all the potential is going to come out. But it's more like cultivating. It's like, I actually need to create the conditions for this potential to actually manifest. And if I'm not doing the work in my organization to cultivate that potential, it could be there, but it's not going to realize.
Or really even in myself, right? Maybe that potential for an individual requires me to change change either my assumptions or my beliefs, the way I was going to go about solving a problem, the problem I was going to go about solving, like all of these things, right? So again, it requires a level of humility in the leadership and in the organization to ask yourself, where am I wrong? What do I know? Is that right? All of that.
Shifting gears a little bit, you certainly don't have to name names, but have you made any really bad hiring mistakes? And what have you,
of course.
What did you learn from them? What did you miss in retrospect? What did you miss? You thought you were really confident, you missed something. Yeah. Where did you fall down?
Two things. So ironically, I would say that some of my bad hiring mistakes have been not really hires, but when, like organization shifts where I get people and I don't quickly enough understand what their role should be versus what their role is, which is a different kind of hiring mistake because actually I think it's a more common and higher risk one for me. But I've also, of course, like anyone, you can only get so much insight into a hire. Every human relationship is a risk-taking exercise, and I think we should think about how those relationships need to adapt and evolve over time. And so, kind of two things I think about. First, figuring out that it's not working actually comes pretty easy. Getting where I've made big mistakes is now what, right? Taking the right steps quick enough. And so I would say that where I've gotten it wrong in the past, I have over rotated on worrying about the risk of making a change and under rotated on the urgency that and the longer term benefit that will happen if I just were more decisive more quickly. So I guess that would fall into as I've gotten older and more experienced, I've learned that doubting myself is probably one of my bigger risks. And
Mm.
then taking action on what I know I need to do, especially when it's hard, quickly and, confidently, but also in a way that values each of the players in that relationship,
Mhm.
is probably the things that, when you look back, you regret the most is like, okay, I knew this needed to happen here, but I didn't actually, for a variety of well-intentioned reasons, take action until there. So I would say that that's probably the biggest thing. And I don't really believe that, like, I don't spend any time beating myself up on like, okay, well, like why did I screw up in the hiring process? I think that's probably, yes, asking yourself, should we ask better questions? Of course, that's a good idea.
Mhm.
Um, but on the other hand, I think you need to, value the mistakes and the learnings from mistakes as much as anything else, as opposed to investing in regret,
Mhm.
um, in that regard.
As long as you can learn from it and change
Yeah,
from it.
and as long as you're not making them over and over again, right? Like making new mistakes should
Yeah.
be a key part of your ethos, not just making mistakes.
A lot of your depth and your career has been on the technical side, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are building technical teams, are heads of talent acquisition over engineering. Any reflections around hiring or building teams, building technical teams specifically, different approaches that you've taken in that discipline versus on the, say, the go-to-market side or the marketing or the business side?
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw some data recently, about the difficulty of hiring tech. And I totally empathize, right? Do you like go over rotate on the testing side? Do you over rotate on the behavioral side? How do you navigate? I also think in tech, we tend to be just a little bit too fond of ourselves. And so we think that, like, and I've even been victim of this, right? Like, once you're in an organization, you use a certain set of tools, you have a certain set of things that you do on a regular basis, and you overvalue people that know those things
Mhm.
versus people that come from other groups that do the same thing with maybe a different tool or a different whatever. And so I feel that um, the best tech leaders in interviewing, in my experience, understand the difference between just a proficiency in a specific tool versus a proficiency in the thinking, the execution, and the delivery of solutions and ultimately products with those tools. And
Mm.
and so I would, it's a lot to me about, are the people really able to deliver? Do they care about the quality and the ultimate end user experience of what they deliver? Is
Mm.
it reliable and scalable and all of that? And then what are the mechanics they use to do that? And I think sometimes we oftentimes want to just like understand the mechanics and then just, oh, well, of course it worked out. So I think that gets to, if you can really make sure that you're testing for that velocity side and that creativity side and the willingness to really stand behind what you build. And also, again, remember, I work in enterprise software. A lot of the software that you build is really working on somebody else's code from years
Mhm.
ago, right? And so being willing to really dig in and understand that versus, oh, well, I have to just only write brand new and only anything that code that I wrote is at all understandable or knowable, right? So
Yeah.
I think some pragmatism in what is the actual job, what is the customer, and what is the problem that you're solving, and recognizing what are the elements of success there. And sure, technical tools matter, but that is not the only thing.
Super helpful. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask a very tactical question. I find senior executives have been in this situation many, many times where you're considering really strong internal candidates and really strong external candidates for the same role. How do you think about running the process in that instance where you have so much more information, right, and access to the folks internally versus externally? How do you try to run an equitable process, an informed process? Like, how do you architect that when you have yeah, when you're hiring for a big role and you've got a great internal pipeline and a set of external candidates as well.
Yeah, this is tough because I have to say I show up differently depending on the problem that I'm trying to solve towards this thing. So, of course, I have a ton of internal bias myself for growing and developing people. So I'm super happy when internal candidates raise their hands. I'm super happy when we see them grow and we see them develop and we see them expand. And giving people new opportunities is kind of just core. And obviously, when you're a big company, that's super important because you have a large population of people. Um, but then sometimes it's also really important to think in terms of change and disruption and change agents. And sometimes internal people can't, by definition, help with that. And so I think first being really clear with my own intention of like what problem am I trying to solve? What do I need? What does the business need right now? Why does the business need that? And then making sure that that is clear to everyone that this is what I'm looking for. And it's not to say that internal people can't be disruptive or have other ideas. Oftentimes they do, especially if you're moving them from a place that's not super adjacent. You know, it could be a potentially distant move. But really, I think I try to be really transparent about what it is that I'm looking for and what skills and what capabilities. And then the other bit I think is missed a lot. The important thing about bringing internal candidates forward is to make sure that they get opportunity for visibility and growth, regardless of whether they get the role. And so I also, especially when it's people in my own team, like maybe raising their hands for a bigger role in another organization, which I'm also very supportive of. I spend a lot of time with them saying, thinking through what's the probability of you getting the role, but what is the probability of something great happening for you raising your hand for the role, whether you get better insight of what you need to develop so that you can get that opportunity, whether you get better insight of who are the stakeholders that you don't know that you should know to create and grow opportunities, or whether it's just a moment for you to shine and for people to get to know you even outside of that. And so I really encourage people to not make it a zero sum game for anyone, not make it a zero sum game for external candidates or internal candidates. I believe that hiring is a relationship game. I believe that, relationships are long-term things. And I also believe that every single time you do an interview or you connect with someone, again, you should use it as an opportunity for learning for yourself and reevaluating even your own preconceived ideas of what you're trying to define in the role. And so I think if you go into it with that, if you're really transparent that this is what I'm doing, I'm looking out to see what don't I know? What am I not thinking about? What can external people challenge me with? Who don't I know internally, or who are considering in this way, and how can I get to know them better in that context? And oftentimes, what happens, at least for me, is maybe I don't find, maybe I do both. Maybe I imagine an entirely different organization opportunity as part of this discovery. So to me, I always go into it with this is what I think I'm doing, but maybe something comes in that has me change my mind, and that's great too.
A little bit of yes, and I love the idea of just looking at an interview not just as an opportunity to open a door to a job, but as a development opportunity for folks internally. Like they should always get something out of that, and even externally, right? Like hopefully every person who interviews with our company leaves feeling like they got something out of that, whether they got the job or not. You raised an interesting that you were defining the problem. Like, do I need continuity or disruption in this role? That might be one element of the problem I'm solving. Are there other frameworks that you use to define that problem? When I have an open role, I'm considering the kind of candidate. Yeah. What do I need to solve for? What are the other mental frameworks that you use as you define that problem, aside from like, this is the job, right? This is the job.
Right. Yeah, and as I've told you, like the job to me is like table stakes, not actually that interesting. It's really the other bits that are so interesting. And so yeah, you nailed it as far as like, okay, for the job, do I need a disruptor? Do I need a continuity story? Do I what is the need on the business side? But then I think in terms of for the team and for the organization, what cultural gaps and could we fill and expand in our own thinking by bringing this person in? Does this person help us with a particular set of strengths we're missing? Maybe we're over rotated on big picture thinking and not enough on execution, or we're over rotated on, kind of the ready, fire, aim, like just we're such activators that we don't have thoughtful, challenge partners. Or maybe we're just really struggle with detail oriented versus strategic thinking. So like sort of as an organizational unit, what other things do we need that could round us out and help elevate all of us? And in some cases, elevate us by taking a burden off, because if you're not good at something, you're probably not doing well at it, and sort of strengthening in the aggregate. And in some cases, in that cultural element, like maybe teaching us something, right? Maybe showing up with humor that we're lacking, or with seriousness that we're lacking, or whatever it is that this individual is bringing, which is back to my, like, when we start, like, what's amazing about you, what's uniquely amazing about you, and how do you share that in service of others? How do you make that valuable to others? So it works for the candidate, but it most importantly works as you think about the organization you're trying to build, the culture you're trying to build, the team that you're trying to build. And to me, I think about it as sort of like the structural strength that you're trying to build into the organization, so that it becomes sort of an overall stronger than it was before.
It's interesting. None of that gets captured in the job description.
Correct.
Right. So there's, I just we think about hiring all day. So you think about a recruiter sitting down with a hiring manager, or maybe a hiring manager sitting down just for herself in front of a computer screen thinking, okay, what do I need in this role? And what I'm hearing is there's a set of considerations that are completely different from the job description that you should be running through as kind of a checklist of like, what do I need in this person in this role? Maybe there's a couple different flavors you could look for. And certainly at a senior level, you kind of have a lot of latitude to make calls. How does that, like, if there are frontline managers, I've got like a team of 6 and I've got an open role on my team, do I have that same latitude to like think beyond the job description? Did you do that kind of thinking when you were early in your career and it's persisted, or did you end up doing more of it as you got much more senior and kind of higher in the organization?
So I absolutely did it early in my career, although I didn't understand that was unusual. Back to the kind of start of my career and the lack of traditional start. I learned this more on when I was talking with people about opportunities for myself. I learned very quickly that it is super unusual the way I look at talent and the way I look at organizations. And I'm still kind of trying to come to terms with how much do I want to, affect change writ large, and how much do I just recognize that, okay, not everybody's ready for that. It's outside of a lot of people's comfort zones. But for the kind of kindred soul line managers out there, I absolutely believe it's available to you. It's available to you, whether you have a team of 3 or 5 or 12 or 20 or whatever. It is in your best interest to know what is your team good at and what aren't they good at, and how could that next hire help you shore that up, make that better, support them better, and how can you quit hiring people that have your skills and start hiring people that have the things you don't have? And how do you build that confidence in yourself that isn't a threat to you, that's a gift? And how do you think about, in hiring that person, can you hire a person with potential to ultimately be your boss one day? That is usually the biggest barrier that I think line managers have, is their own confidence that, oh my God, what if I hire somebody smarter than me, better than me, has skills I don't have, etc. Oh, that's terrible. I need to hire people that look like me, have the same skills, but I'm slightly better because, that helps assure my spot, right? I can promise you, everybody out there, again, I am now president of an entire large organization. I am terrible at so many things, it's not even funny. And knowing that you're not good at something is, again, a really great gift. Now, I have the other benefit of being a woman in tech. And so people underestimated my abilities from the get go anyway. So, but at the same time, you want to hire people that will be your boss someday. You want to be confident enough to do that, because the better you can be at thinking like that, the less barrier you put to your own career projections and growth.
Love
And
that.
and it's so counterintuitive, and especially when you're young and insecure and know that you don't know what you don't know, and you really wish people didn't know that you didn't know things. Um, the quicker you get over yourself and recognize that your job is building a great team and creating opportunities for them to grow, the quicker you build career opportunity for yourself.
It's a great lesson. Um, you touched on being a woman in tech. I want to shift to the topic like DEI, equitable hiring. I know this is a big passion of yours. What does equitable hiring mean to you? What are the pillars of an equitable hiring process? Or is that even the right way to think about it? Would you use a different framework to say this is what we should aspire to for our hiring process to be?
So a couple things. I am a big believer in setting targets. I know that's controversial, and there's a lot of energy about that. I think in building targets, they shouldn't be absolute, but I think you need to challenge yourself that maybe you just need to try harder, and find those binders of women and those groups of people of color, and challenge yourself. I think we all need to, and I say this as a white woman in tech. I am a minority, but I'm not an intersectional minority. I'm not neurodivergent mostly, and I'm not. There's a whole lot of lived experiences that I myself don't have even proper understanding or empathy or clarity of what I'm missing by not having those voices close to me and available. And for me, in kind of thinking about diversity, of course, it's the pieces and the things that we think about today, but it's even broader than that. I mean, it's interesting. The majority of my team were not raised in the US, and culturally bring a wealth of experiences, of lived experiences that are very different. Now that becomes, a barrier when I make all of the jokes I make about terrible 1980s television or sort of childhood norms. And that is fantastic, because there's an opportunity for us to learn from each other. And so I think when you think about equitable hiring, I think it's two things. One, do you even have the right targets for yourself, the right goals, and the right definition of experiences available? Are you making opportunities available in an equal way? And I can promise you the answer to that is no. And then ask yourself where and why, and quit thinking of it as a binary, I'm good or I'm bad, but more about like, hey, I have more to learn, and I have opportunities to get better. And I think thinking of it in that way really, really matters. And then really help yourself understand why. If everybody looks like you, everybody thinks like you, everybody behaves like you, everybody has the same background as you're just going to miss. Yes, it'll be very comfortable, and everybody will have all the inside jokes, and it will be very easy to feel comfortable. But does feeling comfortable create growth? It doesn't. There's no growth in comfort, right? The growth is in discomfort. And are you going to do the right things for your business with that view? Yes, you'll feel really important. And this gets back to the kind of like hire people smarter than you, hire people that have different experiences. It will feel comfortable. It will feel like you are center and important and all of that when everybody looks like you, behaves like you, and has the same beliefs as you. But it's not helping you do the most important things. And I would argue it's actually holding not just you back professionally, but personally from your own growth and your own understanding of the world. And I think, as the world gets flatter, our understanding of each other, we know there's lots of gaps there. Getting good at getting over yourself and learning other people's points of view and perspectives and why they have those beliefs, etc., is super helpful in growing yourself. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but it does give you a different framework for how you think. And honestly, at the end of the day, like, AI does a lot of the work for us in the future, right? So we need to think more creatively. We need to think more expansively. And you're never going to get that if you just stay in a filter bubble.
So you shared set targets very tactically. And then it sounds like from a hiring manager perspective, get comfortable being uncomfortable and not being in the center of the world. As you think about trying to drive change at scale, like at the scale of SAP SuccessFactors to build an equitable hiring process, certainly set targets, scales. What else do you need to do from a process or operational perspective to kind of help people help themselves, or help the process help people to make change?
Yeah. So thinking about data and thinking about a growth mindset. So the good thing about setting targets is you start to track data and you start to ask yourself, okay, what is this data showing and where are we struggling? And then apply curiosity to both your process and to your thinking, frankly. And so I'll give you an example. Like, we struggle in general as an industry in the operations side of the house, right? The belief is that DevOps and ops in technology is, and there's truth to this, but there's also some falseness to this, that it's a very intense job. It's, it's 24/7, it's eyes on glass. It's, there's a lot of things, like when something goes wrong, you work a lot of extra hours. You really, like, you're just like, and it's also very unpredictable, right? Because you don't get to say, oh, this is how it is. And so it comes at you and you have to respond. Now, a lot of people tell me, well, that makes it hard for women, who have a primary caregiver responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I have so much that I both empathize and understand about that story. But I argue you can solve that organizationally, right? Instead of having one person that knows something, have several people that know things across different time zones, across different things, and have multiple people that can have each other's back. So it's the same thinking you would think of, like, with a job share, but instead you're thinking of it in sort of a follow the sun 24/7. How do you protect your customers while not having people work 24/7? Now, of course, you have the benefit, if you have a larger organization, that gets easier to do because you can scale that up in a much more strategic way. But I would still argue there's still a mindset that, like, oh, well, that precludes people with small children and caregiver responsibilities, which we know falls more than 70% on women, right? Depending on where you are in the globe, it can be even worse. And so the idea that women don't want those jobs is a little bit of a recursive problem, right? So ask yourself those questions. Are we not even talking about what the job is properly? Are we not giving women, are we assuming they don't want those jobs? So we're just kind of encouraging them not to apply or not to participate. Are we not crafting those jobs properly so that it is possible to have rigid time commitments that are super important, and simultaneously be pretty badass about, caring about customers and keeping systems up, et cetera? I believe you can do both.
Yeah. When we last caught up, you shared a story about when you were interviewing for senior executive and even CEO roles, and the experience that you had. If you're open to sharing it, I think it would be a really powerful story to share. Yeah.
So what's so fascinating, and especially as I said, as a woman in tech and as a woman that does not have, like, doesn't show up the same as others in a lot of ways, and also simultaneously being very proud of that. I found two things really interesting in looking for roles. Number one, because I had a broader variety of skills than a lot of people, that oftentimes, so kind of back to the, oh my goodness, I can't see this person in this role because there's other skills that I don't need, you know. And so one of the things I learned is that I had to actually be sure not to talk about some of the other skills I had and only focus on the skills that particular role was yearning for in that moment. And I found that disappointing, but a real learning experience for me. And then the other thing is, not shockingly, but also important. We talk a lot about how important it is to have someone that looks like you in the interview process. We know that women on boards, until you get two or three, and the real number is three, you can have a person there, but they don't have a voice in defining in being able to stand up and advocate in the way that they would want to, because they get either drowned out or they just don't feel comfortable raising their voice. It's the same in the hiring process. And let's be clear, I interviewed for a lot of roles, and the majority of the time there's been no woman, or at best one woman, as part of that interview panel. And it becomes very clear that that in the selection process, that really does make a difference. So again, it's not just hiring at line level roles that it matters. It's at every level. I think we're getting better as an industry. But I do think it's easy to recognize potential, and it's easy to recognize talent when it looks like you and sounds like you.
Mm.
And these, again, I have not felt undervalued or unappreciated or like overt bias in any job I've ever interviewed for.
Mm.
So this runs deep, right?
Mm.
These are very evolved, well-intentioned men interviewing for roles and still finding a reason that, the female candidate might not be as qualified. That's been my experience. And I think that, the data suggests that that's an experience for a lot of people, and it will always be an experience for a lot of people, because there just aren't enough people that you can point to that you would say, oh, well, I understand this person because they look like that other person. And we're, as humans, we like to be pattern matchers. And again, the pattern that we see that makes the most sense to us is an ethnocentric one that is tied to how we learn and how we understand the world and how we have been successful in the world. And so when you're interviewing with people that have been very successful, and it's easy for them to see the success that looks and like them. And when I say looks like them, I don't just mean in the physical body, but also in the experiences that got you to where you are. And oftentimes, career paths that are successful don't look exactly the same.
Thank you for sharing that. It strikes me, we were talking about potential before, and when you're a candidate interviewing, you're also interviewing the company. And if a manager who's interviewing you is not interested in the full range of skills that you bring to the table, that's probably not somebody who's going to invest in your potential or unlock that for you. Okay, last few minutes, shifting gears a little bit. You mentioned AI is going to change the whole game, and so we need to think, where are we in the hype cycle of AI, HR? What's real? What's hype? You have a front row seat to this in terms of product and what you're thinking about in roadmap. Like, what's your take on where we are and what's really imminent from a change perspective?
Yeah, and just like everyone else, I am super excited. And it's interesting because I actually am this is probably terrible to admit, but I'm really a late arriver to most technology shifts, especially as it like consumer technology, right? I'm not like the first person to run out and get the first version of anything. And most of that is, probably based on my experience in tech, but also just the level of the barrier to entry, if you will. So I'll say, like, I got my first iPhone once they had the maps included in it, because I have a sense of direction disability. It is an actual real thing. And having access to GPS on my phone, that was the killer app for me. And so again, when I think about AI, I'm super excited, because the breakthrough we've really just seen is that what's in it for me barrier to entry has been unlocked. Now, does it set, a whole bunch of other things in motion, just like the iPhone did? You bet. Are those barriers, some good, some bad? Can we worry about a lot of other things? You bet. Do we have any choice? No, because this is happening no matter what. So spending a lot of time being anxious is probably not a productive use of time. I think thinking about being smart about how we approach it, at least from a technology provider point of view. Now I'm speaking a little bit about my responsibility and my role in what I do, but also how I think about it. I think we have a really great opportunity to redefine where this value is and who this value is for. In the past, technology has primarily been for automation of things that help a corporation. And I think that's fantastic. We've basically, since the Industrial Revolution till now, have built a whole lot of value creation and a whole lot of momentum based on that thesis, right? Mm-hmm. I think now with the breakthrough of AI, we actually have an opportunity in a similar way that we might think about what mobile has done, et cetera, or even the kind of wave of consumer apps and all of that. We have an opportunity to think about what does it mean for helping individuals? What does it mean for reducing, sort of like actually thinking about equity in a different way, because it sort of takes away, and this is why there's a lot of angst about it. People that have spent a whole lot of time in written communication beauty and grammar and all of that, all of a sudden, all of that investment is sort of like the gone the way of the spell checker, right? Like if you were great at spelling in the past, that was like a huge advantage until spell checker came around, and like most of us can fake it, right? And so again, it's exactly the same sort of thing. And so I'm super optimistic, but I'm also very mindful of how do we take the promise of this and actually make it helpful to individuals? How do we make it not burdensome? How do we keep them informed of what's really happening when they use these tools? How do we protect them from making big mistakes, right? And then how do we think about bad actors, of course? But setting that aside, I really like to think in terms of how do we as individuals, as humans, see this as a way to maximize our own potential and to think about what we can bring to the world without, in the same way that, like, again, being able to check your email on your phone, being able to not have to drive into the office to fix a problem if a customer has a problem. Like there's real value, and then there's also risk, right? Now I'm fixing customer problems, 24/7, right? How do I not do that? I think it's all the same thing. It's accelerating really fast, and I'm super optimistic about it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, we don't have much time left, and I was going to ask this follow-up question, which you just flipped on its head. I was going to ask, where does AI, where do you see it have the most impact in the talent life cycle, from hiring, developing, onboarding, training, et cetera? But that's all in service of the company. And so a different question would be like, where is it most valuable for the individual in their career journey? Right? As a
I think
employee.
It helps. So a couple things. It helps with skill identification, and that helps both with the hiring process, but also with internal mobility. It helps with learning agility, right? You can learn things a lot faster, and you can choose what you are and aren't learning and what you are and aren't just getting answers about, right? It helps with time to productivity, because you're not spending so much time trying to catch up. It can really accelerate that, and it can individualize that in a way more interesting way. Yeah. And so if you kind of take all of that and lump it into productivity, you start to realize that we can only just begin to imagine what we're capable of when we're not stuck in tedium all day long. And so, and for each of us, that's going to look a little bit different. But for some of us, it'll be about, saving time. And for some of us, it'll be about being able to do things we're terrible at. And so for some of us, it'll be about expanding how we connect with each other. But I do believe that there's a ton of productivity gains that we're just now starting to think about.
Very cool. Last one for you. You can keep it quick. What do you want to learn and why?
I love it. So I want to learn how humans can really be more individualized in every part of the work story. How we can be more individualized in how we learn, how we can be more individualized in how we contribute, how we can be more individualized in how we're valued, how we're recognized, how we're contributing, how we're evolving and adapting. I want us to give credit for each of us that we have the ability to do more than we've been given credit for in the past. And I want to learn how to make that happen, not just for myself, but for the world writ large.
Feels like AI is going to be a big part of that.
It is. I truly believe that.
Very cool. Meg Bear, President and Chief Product Officer of SAP SuccessFactors. Thank you, Meg. This was super, super fun. And real pleasure. And welcome back on anytime. And you can find a recording of this at brighthire.com. Again, Meg, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.